All right, here we go. Well, we'll go ahead and dive right in. Did you have a chance to read the participant information form?
Yes. The consent form? Yes.
Yes. Everything okay with you there?
Yes. You have my permission to begin and to record.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, to start, could you please state your name?
Sure. It's Jane Henrici.
And could you tell me a little bit about your current affiliation and then about your professional background?
So I am an independent researcher. I am independently employed. I contract as a senior level researcher and senior gender advisor. So different in international development projects primarily, although sometimes it's domestic. And these contracts are most of the time they are for daily rate, occasionally per hour, and occasionally just by the process. So I've been doing that since 2014, and in addition, I teach part-time as an adjunct professorial lecturer at the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. I teach primarily, almost exclusively, in what's called the Global Gender Studies program at the School of International Affairs. I teach mostly graduate seminars, one in research methods, and then I rotate every spring in either gender and disaster or gender and economic development. And then I also teach every fall an undergraduate course on gender, migration, and development. The background is that I have my doctorate in anthropology, and I consider myself both a feminist anthropologist and an economic anthropologist. And I have conducted primary research in various countries in Latin America and across the United States on this topic related to intersectionality. Is the simplest, shortest way to put it. I have also taught and conducted projects or worked with projects in Asia, and I've directed others, supervised others in research in North Africa and the Middle East. Right, so I think that covers quite a bit about my background. I'm sure more will come up as we speak. But is there anything else in particular about my background or my affiliation that you'd like to know?
I think that's great for now. Certainly you've got a lot on your plate and have an amazingly diverse background that you bring to the table. I can see why you would be teaching in the arena where you're teaching and obviously doing the kind of research at this point that you're doing. Would you say that you consider yourself a disaster researcher, or when and how did you get involved with research on disasters?
Sure. So I know that's just a simple answer, and sometimes yes, sometimes no. And I know, all right, some people think of me as a specialist in the United States, for example, United States poverty and gender and poverty and race, for example, in the United States, because they know my publications and my research in that. Others think of me only as a Latin Americanist, and still others think of me as more a gender specialist than a researcher, and others think of me as a disaster specialist. So it really depends on what people have read, and to me, all of these things very clearly overlap. But it's also not an easy topic to write about so that it all overlaps. But it's definitely whenever I'm studying a situation of poverty, I'm hearing about situations of poor health that are being affected by increasing sudden onset and slow onset issues of climate change and disasters. And then, of course, those issues also conversely help, affect socioeconomic conditions. So, to me, it depends on the context and it depends on the contract, how I refer to myself. Currently, I don't know if this might be jumping the topic or not, and I know you asked me how I got into disaster research. I'll tell you about that in a second. But currently, the contract that I'm working on is with a organization, nonprofit, an international nonprofit called Sustainable Travel International, STI, which I know is an unfortunate acronym in English. It's an organization that with financial headquarters in the United States, but that's being operated out of Europe, and it's very international in pulling on people who care very much about a range of issues, for example, food out of Italy, carbon offsetting. I'm not even actually positive what nation those specialists are working in. Australian experts on the Western Pacific, and myself, as well as people in England, part of UK, and Spain. So the project is Palau, the island of Palau, which currently does not have any COVID cases, and there's been a lot of studies over the history of social science on gender relations in those zones, and relatively speaking, it's known for, again, relative equity and equality in terms of gender. But I've been brought on to make sure that as a new tourism program for the island is being developed, that I help make sure that gender is mainstreamed and integrated throughout it. But because of my disaster background, I'm helping to make sure also that certain key issues are addressed, or at least recognized, and they are anticipated and hopefully addressed in terms of disaster recovery. Because while there might not be cases yet, the island has already been enormously affected by the economic restrictions in terms of travel and, and also remittances, because everybody's been repatriated from other places to the Western Islands, the Pacific Islands, Western Pacific Islands. And then others are working on ocean and other aspects of, there's just so many different things that have to come together. So that makes it clear, I hope, that I think of disaster not just in terms of sudden onset, but slow onset too. Mm-hmm. And I go back to how I got into it. So I actually did not want to start specializing in disaster. I knew and respected a great many anthropologists who already did work on that topic back in the late 2007, 2008 era. But I had done extensive research on poverty and race and gender, again, in the United States and in Latin America, and happened to have grown up in Louisiana, and my parents were living just outside of the city of New Orleans, and my father worked in New Orleans. They had just retired and moved away when Katrina hit. And it was actually hard on them, not nearly as hard as it was on the people there, of course. But when an opportunity arose for me to take the lead on a major project with the Institute for Women's Policy Research, IWPR, to work with Black women who had been displaced first by the flooding of the city of New Orleans after the hurricane, and then displaced there by public housing policies that were being used to keep them returning to their former apartments, public housing apartments, or at least that's, they viewed it, how the women viewed it, and how many activists were arguing about it in the court. So I came in to do research on them, and we did extensive ethnographic research, and then eventually got out several articles in a book chapter, and then the report, which was quite an emotional as well as important work. It's been very, very well received. Received a lot of praise, its depth and breadth, but it was hard. I think it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, for many reasons. But it just because poverty, economics, race, gender, racism, sexism, so many different things were part of it. It was very difficult to tease out and write about. But it had a great impact, I'm pleased to say, across popular press, academic. It had an impact, and just a wide range of audiences, in city planners. So it's been very satisfying in that sense too, probably more than anything else that I've published. So it prompted me, again, it's not been as many years as many disasters, I know. Relatively speaking, I've hardly done anything, and I'm new to it because it's only been 10 years. But it definitely, I think I brought a lot to it that people who had not got social safety nets and benefits and their connection to racism and sexism, I think I was able to bring something to that they might not have been able to. And then conversely, I've been still learning from them about a lot of the different aspects about hazards and disaster and what tends to happen in terms of first humanitarian responses and then what's attempted during recovery and long-term process.
Well, it sounds like you've certainly brought a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective to the disaster arena. So it sounds also like Katrina would be considered the seminal disaster event that helped to shape your thinking about disaster research. Is that fair to say?
Really, I think it was emotional in part because I had lived there, because my parents were continuing. It was an emotional. The cities were emotional. I don't know that it's what convinced me to go on. What then happened? That's a good question. I would say that's what began me able to refer to myself as having done research on disasters and having presented and published on it. But then what happened was the country where I had done my doctoral field research and Fulbright scholar work, which is Peru, experienced an earthquake, a coastal earthquake, which affected disproportionately the Afro-Peruvian coastal population. And I could tell from what I was reading in Spanish and English that there was some pattern, just as I had seen in New Orleans, and some good friends of mine in Haiti, of rhetoric and attitude on the part of governments and those who were proposing recovery development, there's a pattern. And I got an opportunity. It was a very, very small project, and I haven't published much on it, but I did go down several times. And I think that was more some, because it shocked me in a way that it's different. It's so different when you realize that there are patterns across nations than when you are in one context, I think. That it can be shocking to me, and I guess that might sound naive, but when you realize that you see information, and you don't know how malicious or how deliberate it is. I'm not trying to say that, but yes, it is misinformation being presented, and then on the basis of that misinformation, decisions are being made for people's lives and livelihoods, and I think that is more galvanizing to me to try and mitigate that. If not, I'm not going to say I stopped it, but just to keep trying to work against that.
You indicated a number of different projects that you've worked on over the years, particularly those internationally, and the consulting work that you've done. Is there a particular study that you have been involved with, right before COVID-19 struck? I would imagine, given what you said, there would be any number of them that would have been going on in the last couple of years before the pandemic.
So I have been asked, I have been invited, I don't want to make it, it's one of those things, let's see, how to say this? So a dear friend of mine, who's a Haitian specialist, Mark Schuler, he's brilliant, and he's amazing, and he publishes enormous quantities, had been asking whether I would be interested in submitting a claim on gender and disaster to the Bergham theory on anthropology of disaster. And I kept answering that I am not an academic, and so I don't have support. I don't get any career credit for writing or publishing. And I know I was a full-time academic for a while, so I know that it doesn't feel like you get credit or time and get support. You have students, you have funding, you have encouragement. Anytime I am not doing contract work, I am losing money, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I don't have these other resources. But I am affiliated. George Washington has been enormously supportive of me. So I finally just realized I was being kind of, I don't know, that I did want a new book out, that I teach the course, that I've been seeing, I know amazing scholars on that topic. But we're getting a little old, and there were many new approaches coming out, and furthermore, so many people were saying to me, who were specialists, much more knowledgeable than I, about the environment, that we can't even mitigation for climate change is, that was a decade ago that we could have attempted that. Now we have to use adaptation. I don't know if that's true. By the way, don't quote me on that as a fact.
All right.
Because I'm not an environmental, in terms of the measurement of the temperature and what we can or cannot do. But I was being told that, so I thought, well, okay, I know that there are some books out there on climate change, adaptation, and gender. I could, maybe a new one is still called for. So I'm going to see if I can get some of these fabulous people that I know are out there to put together, help me put together a plan. So I was not working on sudden onset disaster. I was working on, but of course they're related, as you know. By the way, there's a really good article that just came out, that just published, that does a nice job. I'll share it if you'd like, but does a nice job on summarizing health. The slow onset of climate change, related to climate change, and the sudden onset of everything else we deal with are so intimately related, which we knew and we know, but I thought this author did a very nice job in distinctly listing what's happening.
Oh, I would love to see that. Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, I know. It's so vague sometimes. Everybody knows there's more rain. What exactly is there? How does it connect? Anyway, so, so I began about a year ago, maybe a little bit, a year ago, working with a friend of mine, and we started pitching ideas back and forth, and we were thinking, well, what kind of research do we want to do? And so then some other friends of mine were like, well, I want to be involved. I'm interested, and then others were like, Jane, I'm ready to retire. I don't want anything to do with it. Let me know when it's over because I'd love to read it. Like that kind of thing. So I was getting very mixed responses as it's just kind of going in circles. We had, by December, we had a few that were saying yes, and we had some ideas for some new research based on where people were working, and so, to make it affordable, because most of us are not academic, full-time academic. And Liz, too, which turned out to be really important when COVID hit. So the ideas were these in December of 2018. Coincidentally with Wuhan, I didn't know that. One of those projects that I worked on when I was at Institute for Policy Research was an excellent project. I did not direct it. It was directed by a colleague at the time, Cindy Hess, and she's amazing. And we looked at and did an ethnographic study. Well, this is really great. Organizations in Phoenix, the D.C. area of Virginia, Maryland, D.C., and Atlanta. We looked at recent organizations helping recent immigrants to find out basically everything we could about them. And really, again, it was well received. It was a good project. It had a lot of spin-offs from that. So my colleague and one of my colleagues, my contract wife, we'll say, she works as an advocate for infants. So we thought, let's revisit that. Let's focus on the D.C., Virginia, Maryland area. And this other person who lives in Maryland, I said, I had heard that farmers in the United States a few years ago, when a student of mine talked to them about climate change, were absolutely all denialists, just all denialists. And it would be interesting to hear about their households in terms of gender, in terms of diversity of race, and other aspects of diversity and social identity. And how, now that, years into it, how do they feel about climate change adaptation? So then, coincidentally, when I was teaching a class on economic development, I had two students in the class, one from Wuhan and one from Albany, Georgia. You probably heard about in terms of the funerals and at the outbreak of it here in the United States.
Yes.
So when we were all put online, it was so sad because the class, how seminar gels. It takes a while to gel, and then all the students are teaching each other, and that's what they want. They're all stimulating each other's ideas and getting them to push themselves harder. So it was just reaching that point. We all had to chatter, and the students from China, of course, one set of concerns. The other students from foreign, the other students on visas from different countries, other concerns. Meanwhile, family members dying in another nation and students can't go to the funeral. everything was happening and affecting my class. I don't normally ever take students from a class and give special opportunity because I think that's unfair. I never liked it when I was a student. But these are such odd circumstances. In March, when I was submitting all these IRBs for the climate change book that I had pivoted to make it them about COVID, I also asked, would you be able to talk to through your family, get a hold of people you don't know so we can have some objectivity and survey and interview them remotely in Wuhan? He said yes. And then this other, I said, well, let's, come summer after you've graduated, let's talk about Albany, Georgia. So that's how we have 4 projects going, 3 of which have already been cleared, 2 of which have exempt status, and the third has proof the Wuhan study received much more thorough review for many reasons. And so it's a little bit delayed. That one was one for which I was able to obtain a small NSF grant through the Natural Hazards Center for equipment and data usage, and did not get funding from the Hazard Center for either of those two, but did GW support for research assistantship. Anyway, so basically we have a little team, and we've been meeting every week for each project. Then in addition, these 2 other former students had on their own been seeking a grant in the Pacific Islands. Completely coincidentally, I then got this opportunity with Palau. And maybe it wasn't just coincidence, maybe I was ready and did well on the interview because I was prepped, because I was thinking much about the Western Pacific already and gender and what was going on in COVID. At any rate, they had permission from Sustainable Travel to study our project as it evolves, and write about it in terms of disaster recovery and climate change adaptation. So that's 5 projects, and then I've got my other contract work. The other contract work that I've been doing, we'll see if it gets funded. It's not yet. I don't really think I should. Those are other projects. I guess World Bank project. Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
It's easy to do with everything you have going on.
Well, and really, okay, well, this actually ties to another question that you were going to ask. It's on your list. So maybe I'll wait and then talk about that one. But at any rate, so those are the ones that are moving forward as I do this interview with you. All right? So there.
So what would you say are the goals for perhaps your main study that you referred to?
I don't have a main study. I will, in terms of the goals for all of these, I will say that we all, the co-leads and co-authors, I know that this is true of academics and practitioners, so I don't mean that this is in any way to push those categories, which is, like all categories, but there's no line anyway. We definitely want to have recommendations for practitioners, for policymakers. Those recommendations might not make it into the more academic chapters that go for Burgham, but that's another reason why we are determined to seek different ways of publishing on, even though these are tiny projects. I mean, Rachel, these are, to me they're tiny. Like, think about it. I've done projects where you're interviewing hundreds and thousands of people. Okay, so these are projects where at most, we're going to be thrilled to have 30. So they're small. But they're also pertinent. And so we'll do as much as we can to get as many publications out of them as we can.
You mentioned, of course, your work on intersectionality and your background. Are there any particular concepts or theories that are guiding this current research that you're doing on COVID-19?
So definitely using a gender lens, definitely feminist approaches to social science. Also, some of the newer looking at grounded theory. But I also tend myself to use, and I know that some feminists can be at all feminist, since there are other feminists who have written using view, and I find some of those approaches useful. So if I'd rather use a Bourdieuian angle, for example, or Portes, his way of, I guess you could say, interpreting Bourdieu on social capital. So Portes, Alejandro Portes says, talked decades ago, I guess now, about looking at social capital and migrants and communities of migrants, and I just found it very useful. I don't necessarily use social capital the way other disaster people do. So it's kind of tricky because, and also in disaster studies, I know that vulnerability, risk, sustainability have very debated terms. Resilience, for example, some people actually have come to hate their terms because of how they've been, how they are deployed in practice sometimes. But I saw that myself years ago in poverty studies, that what can be seen as what is a strength among a people, or could be viewed as a strength among a people, can then be taken advantage of and argued as an excuse by both private and public sectors to not provide support, to not provide any assistance to those people. And so similarly in disaster studies, a lot of certain specialists really hate terms like adaptation even, because it's like, it can simplify. What I'm trying to say is, as we work on this, which we have these intense discussions, all of us, we have these team discussions for example, the farmers are all using it now, and are all using the word steward. And I'm trying to get the students on the project to think critically before we just ourselves use that word, because of what it can mean. They see themselves as stewards. They're like the supers. They're managing everything. We don't need to give them support, and that is absolutely not the case. So I hope that's clear. I know I'm kind of jumping around a lot, so it's not just one theory. So
that's absolutely fine. Could you repeat the word? Did you say steward?
Well, I just gave you an example,
right?
Because the farmers themselves are, I do mean that they themselves are using that word to describe themselves. But they are also being told that they are that. It's a word that is used of them as well.
Well, that's really helpful. The project that we identified you through is the mixed methods research virtually with people quarantined in Wuhan. Yeah. So is that your Hazard Center sponsored?
Yes.
Okay. So that was a quick response grant?
Yes. And yeah.
So could you describe a little bit the mixed methods that you're using and how you're going about that study in particular?
Sure. So as I said, it received the most of IRB reviews of those that I've submitted. And as a result of COVID affecting the university staff, the IRB committee, and of course the fact that they were no doubt bombarded with requests for reviews related to medical issues tied to COVID, which of course needed to come, in my opinion, should come first, should be prioritized. The Wuhan study did not get clearance until mid-July.
Wow.
So we were up and running, but it's only been, as you see, for less than a month. But what we have done, now this is true in Mandarin Chinese, so it has to be, I have to meet with my student and I have to communicate with him a lot about what to do and what not to do, but I also have to trust he's doing it, and then I have to do whatever I can. I shouldn't make it sound like I have to trust. Please don't quote me on that.
Okay.
That sounds bad. But, because that's true of any project, and I really, really, really do not want anybody, there's so much criticism of Chinese, there's so much anti-Chinese sentiment right now that, and I'm so grateful that he's interested in it and doing this, and he is so, so great about being flexible and working on all of this, that that came out wrong. But what I
understood. We'll take care of that.
Thank you. What I intended by that was simply that often I have worked in other languages before where I did not speak the language and I had to work with an interpreter. But always, and with this study, I periodically do whatever I can to check, to do a quality check, just to make sure it's all going as I hope and think that it should, but I also like to hear what people who are in the study say and advise, and I also, of course, wanted to hear what my student says and advises, or former student. He's a former student. He's already graduated. And he's going for a doctorate now at another university. Because all of that, to me, I guess if you're also asking about research methods theory, I'm trained in ethnographic methods. I have supervised and worked on large-scale quantitative. I've designed and fielded surveys, both macro level and micro level. He and I had to work together extensively to develop this survey so that it made sense in English and in Mandarin. And so that took a long time. And then we also had to convince, with the IRB view, we had to go back and forth, plus we had to get more than one person in China to sign off on that we had successfully looked through China's ethics on social science. And with everything that was happening in China and in U.S.-Chinese communications, we had one person, and that person became non-responsive, and then we got another person who was just extremely helpful. But there's this, there's this, I don't know how many hours right now off the top of my head. I'm kind of confused because it's time difference. So all of that added to delays, but it was really worthwhile. So and there are technical issues, Chinese laws that are different from the U.S. laws regarding internet apps. So we had to be very, very careful, which we should be anyway, but I had to make sure I understood from him, and he had to make sure that he understood from me what priorities there were of what. We put the survey together, we launched it in SurveyMonkey, and he received responses, and he received questions about the survey, and we have been discussing those as we've gone along. Then he began, through snowballing, through contact, eventually obtaining consent. It took a long time because of trust, because of questions that people had for us, especially since the quarantine had long ended, and they were like, why are you asking us? You've been under quarantine since we have. Why are you going to talk to us?
Yeah.
And so, but remember, we had submitted while they were in quarantine. So it was designed one way, and then we have, with iterative knowledge and practices, modified slightly, but then he's been able to conduct remote interviews. We have to use like 3 different apps to be able to do that, and we do not video record or audio record on his laptop. And I cannot be present, and I'm not present on the Zoom call as an observer either, or rather the WeChat. So, and since WeChat's about to become illegal here, we have to wrap this up. So there will be very few interviews, but we are learning about gender, about household relations, and about food security. Our primary goal was to find out, I already knew that food was being delivered on a regular basis, but people regularly, even before COVID, in Chinese high-rises especially, and it's a massive city, of course, very, very thriving. I already knew that food deliveries were very common. So that had just been expanded during the lockdown. But one thing that I was interested in was neighborhood associations and their ties, because of my interest in social capital. And I know those things are just meant, but get what I mean. I hope. I wanted to talk about food distribution in communities, in neighborhoods, and coordination of those. We haven't begun analysis. He just had to move. Well, first he had to get his visa, not fixed, but, addressed because of all the recent, I know, I'm sure you've heard. But he needed to make sure that his visa was all, as a student, was all clear with the U.S. government, which it is, and it's all fine. But he needed to take care of that. And then before he moved to begin his program. But he and I have had extensive discussions about Wuhan, about Chinese, what we can, about the differences in cultures. I've done a lot of meetings that I can in English. He was taking my class in gender and economic development, so he knows, he's read a lot of the literature and the theory about gender and disparities and racial disparities in the States. And then, so we talked also about disparities within Wuhan between those who had migrated from rural areas to the city. I do not think we're going to capture that in this little study. We had hoped to, because of so many different cautions that I think are needed. And I'm not saying obstacles because I just want to make it sound like it's negative. I think we've done quite well considering, but we've had to be very, very cautious, respectful, of course. I don't think we're going to capture anything about migrants as we had hoped, about that kind of differentiation in Wuhan.
Did you say that you expected very few interviews? I missed that. There was a little bit of cutting out.
Very few. Not even sure that we'll have, I think we'll have a handful that we will be able to complete before WeChat is cut off. See, WeChat is the only, I don't know this, but WeChat is the only application that's legal in China. But Facebook is not legal. They can't, we're not going to be able to use WhatsApp. Zoom is, well, because that's owned by, and Zoom is not. So WeChat is Chinese application, but the current U.S. administration has just made it illegal.
Okay.
To use, that'll come down with TikTok illegality quite soon.
Right.
Again, I don't want to. I'm not trying to make it sound like it's a complaint here or there. I think that every project of any sort has restrictions and difficulties. These are ones that relate to this particular project.
Mm-hmm. How long do you expect this project to go on? You said things are winding down and access will be winding down. So data collection. Say it again?
The data collection, and that's it. Mm-hmm.
And I know.
And the same is true with the other studies, yes. Mm-hmm.
So you said a couple more weeks?
Yes, except for the Georgia study. The Georgia study is just not getting started.
Okay. Now, you indicated already that you're collaborating with your student on this project, and so this was an existing relationship, but a new collaboration. Would you say that's fair?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's a former student, but yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. And you've already mentioned with respect to some of your other projects that you have ongoing collaborations there. Would you tell me a little bit about those?
Yes, and I want to say that is the most critical part and the most wonderful part of all of this research. That first, as I said, it began years ago with people who in different ways are researchers and practitioners like myself. And then gradually asking, like, first I started with an undergraduate, with whom I got a GW research assistantship, and gradually these graduate students. And then during this happened with different students, again, former students. I need to be careful. And making the same mistake my professors did, where they would still refer to me as their student, even though I'd, long gotten my doctorate. It's like, it's like a habit. At any rate, these are graduates. They have their master's or they have their undergraduate degrees, some of them. But they would reach out to me and they would say, do you know about any jobs or internships because of and I would, I've always, I would send them links or any opportunities I hear about, but I would also say, if you are not otherwise occupied, if you are to, I have these projects going on, I'd like to write you into the IOD and so on and so forth. And we have, as I said, quite a team now, and we just couldn't do it without. And at the same time, and I know this anticipates another one's questions about COVID, but we couldn't afford it. If we have to travel with this many people, that's quite expensive, even if it's just in this area. So the fact that they're volunteering, some of them, yes, have assistantships, but that's not paying their salary. That's paying for data or applications. But it's, or equipment in the case of the natural hazards, the quick response time. But it takes an enormous team to do all of this, to contact people, to schedule things, to set up the different, to run these things, to record them, to run the recordings through auditors, the transcription, to then clean the transcription, and now it's going to work to start coding and analysis within QDA, Max QDA. But we couldn't move at this pace to do this many studies if we didn't have so much. So I'm extremely grateful, and I tell them that all of the time, that I wish I could do more. They're amazing.
Well, I was interested to hear your comment about using Otter. We have considered that, our team, for this study, but nobody really has very much experience with it. This isn't obviously an interview guide question, but how do you feel like it works for you all?
Okay, so here's the thing. I think it's $30 a license a month. So it's not cheap. But if you can figure out a way to have everything ready to go and get it done in a month, that, runs, it takes minutes for a transcription. And by the way, don't get to use the free version. The free version will only transcribe 40 minutes.
Okay.
So it will not go over 40 minutes. So if you have an interview that's longer than 40 minutes, most of us want to have, it will cut it off. And it's an AI. So like Google search engine, it learns as it goes what certain words are that you tend to use and how you tend to pronounce. So you teach it as you clean. So then the next transcription is a little cleaner. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
But it is worth it. Yes, ma'am. I have directed huge projects. I have paid enormous sums of money for transcriptions. I have supervised thousands of interviews and have cleaned them afterwards because somebody just didn't listen or just couldn't bother or just didn't know how to babble. And well, my favorite is that I paid all of this money for people who are English speakers but in another part of the world who censored our like some of the language that our respondents are using and changed the actual word. So yes, so I am telling you, based on all of that, my students, the ones who told me last year, otter, but we're all much past to switch to a new application. You don't. You're getting the benefit of my experience here.
I appreciate that.
You should, all of your things ready to go, so that you don't have to spend more than a month, because I do recognize $30 per license is not cheap. Oh, and unless you have a license, I guess I don't know how many people are on your project that you would license. If it's just you, and you can upload all of them, then you only need the one license. Then it's only $50. And you can add as many people as you want to that group to see the transcripts and to clean them. But you could have a team of 10 people, one license, you do all of the uploading, and then you add all of those of 9, and they can clean for you.
Oh, interesting.
But they cannot upload if they don't have they can upload, it will cut off at 40 if they only have a free license.
Okay. Well,
Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks for that aside. I really appreciate that inside knowledge.
Sure.
Well, we're bumping up on the hour, but I do have a couple more questions if you have a little bit more time.
I do, and I wanted to circle back to the thing about the World Bank in a second, but I want to keep going with the order that you have, and then I'll circle back.
Sure. Well, you've already talked, as in question number 11, a little bit about the challenges associated with conducting your COVID-19 research. Moving into some of the more personal ways that the pandemic has affected your professional life and your research, what are some of those changes?
Well, that's actually a segue. That's perfect. So first I'm going to talk about the professional, and then I'll talk a bit about the personal. So the professional, through one of the colleagues with whom I'm working on the farmer study in particular, was contracted with her to do a study beginning in 2018, a gender analysis in Haiti for the water sanitation and hygiene sector of the World Bank in Haiti. So the way the World Bank does it goes World Bank, Haiti, WASH, so water sanitation and hygiene. So under that sector in Haiti's office, World Bank office, I was a gender advisor in the rural areas and conducted focus groups and research with interpreters in Creole in Haiti. So then, we did it was really expensive. It was a long time. It was great, and we did what's called a gender action plan workshop. You don't need to hear what all that means. It went really, really well, and the ministers of sanitation in Haiti liked me, apparently, because they tried to help me come back to a different project. But I don't speak Creole myself, and I told them that I explained unless you had the funding also for an interpreter, I really don't feel comfortable claiming, I just didn't feel comfortable doing it. But then the world also followed up, said, yes, we'd like you to come back. And projects are going to help follow up with some of the recommendations that Clean made about gender and issues of water, sanitation in Haiti, well, in these rural areas. Across Haiti is what it was. Then COVID hit. And I had been working extensively with a group in Haiti that I had known for years, because I'd also done another project down there previously for George Washington University on women in politics in Haiti. And we had just designed the project. We were just seeking, the World Bank, the West sector was just seeking funding from the larger World Bank to get a go-ahead to fund this big project with youth and women in different rural communities, and we couldn't. So it was all stopped. So let me just say that it doesn't always happen in any project, in any work, that when you make recommendations, people say, fix them, and we want to follow up on them. And this is so satisfying when I've been contracted to do this. This is so gratifying and exciting to be working with local organizations in Haiti and see what we could do that they wanted us to do, that they had told us that they wanted. And then this happened. And at the time, Haiti had not been hit as hard as the United States was being hit. This was late March, early April. And it was quite horrifying what was being said among Haitians down there. Haiti's, so World Bank had to put it on hold. They each had to stay home to their different countries, the people who were based there, in different countries. And so we've been in touch, but it was quite distressing. And I didn't have any income through that source for several weeks, or through any other contract. Then gradually, projects have picked up because people have pivoted to either remote work or planning for a long-term future. It was stressful. And then the personal life, of course, we live in a small apartment. I don't know if you know DC. DC pretty much, most people, it did me a few years ago with a big house. Most people eat out. They meet their friends. They don't. It's not a city like where I lived in, but as a Delta, where you have a big home and you bring people in to entertain. So it affected both my husband's and my work. It affected we had no gym. We had, those are minor issues. We lived in a predominantly black neighborhood in Northeast Washington. We weren't sure what responses were going to be made. We had seen people just be so wonderful and take care of each other's children in their backyard. Gradually, bit by bit, we've actually gotten to see more of our neighbors. I mean, more of our neighbors than we have. After all the initial anxieties and, of course, the horrors of how people were treated in the protests here, I think the Washington D.C. is okay. It's not great. It's okay. And in general, thanks to the support of all these former students and colleagues, actually, that's fine for me. I'm relatively speaking, I think I'm pretty well off.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, absolutely. Until recently, I worked on soft money grants and contracts for 25 years of my career, so I can definitely empathize with not having that source of income. So I'm glad things are sort of turning a corner for you on that. So the last question I have at this point is, what have been the consequences, if any, of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations after the killing of George Floyd on you personally and on your research, if that's the case?
So, on me personally, I think the protest has been, I don't know, I'm not sure if I can answer it like I said, it's an impact on me, as far as I'm grateful for, we've done what we can and here and there. I think they're very important. I think you hate to say they needed to happen because they shouldn't have to happen, but yeah, I mean, if it gets people, all of us, to keep thinking more carefully about our privileges relative to, and I mean everyone says this, and I'll say in a second in the project, but yeah, I guess I don't feel negatively impacted. The only time I felt negatively impacted was the fears that were happening in Washington, D.C., because there happened to be the weather when we had all of our windows that were open and all of the helicopters that the administration had flying around and different military and so forth that were being employed and deployed, and I'm not saying that in criticism of the individuals in the military either. But at any rate, that was short term. Certainly not as long term as the racism behind all of this. Mm-hmm. In terms of the project, it has come up because, as I've already mentioned, 3 of the projects are concentrated in the United States. It's come up in the sense that it's been interesting. People who are I would say, who are mixed race or who identify as mixed race or identify as African American or Black in our studies, definitely bring it up. But it's been interesting, not as far as bringing it up to point something out to us, but to talk about how they're working in partnership with refugees, with Native Americans, with others as well. There's a lot of reminding of everyone about all sorts of different privileges and opportunities as well as suffering. But I will also say, though, that it probably come up a lot more, and I anticipate that others who are doing other projects that you're interviewing and others see, more directly related to, say, activism around race, are probably hearing more about it. I guess I'm not trying to push you for tell me. I'm trying to say that we are hearing about it, but it's not a primary theme. But that's also because our primary themes have to do with adaptations and responses with disaster. Mm-hmm. So it's, related more, although, of course, racism is definitely a part of all that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned just a few minutes ago that there was something that you were interested in circling back to. Do you recall what that was?
I did. You had given me the opportunity. You actually, I had not realized that the next question you were going to ask was how COVID had affected me, and that was the part that I mentioned about the Haiti project, because that Haiti project was very, very important to me, and it was quite, I'm not the only person I know. Compared to other people, I not at all. But when that project had to be, set aside and possibly, we don't know if we'll be able to return to it. It was hard. I think, harder, again, it's a nation. It's harder for the women's organization in Haiti, that was about to get a big contract. I mean, it's just, yeah. So I've already circled back to it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to share or feel might be relevant to this study that we're working on?
So your focus is on disaster researchers during COVID, right?
That is, yes, that is the general theme, although we're coming across some folks that don't identify as disaster researchers and sort of coming out of the woodwork to share their knowledge on COVID-19 and disasters.
One of the things that was happening that I guess I didn't mention, and I don't know, this is very, very small and it might not be of interest, but so I told you I am editing this book. And I told you that I had reached out to all of these different authors before COVID around the world. You know, people who work on different types of issues of gender, different types of genders, different types of aspects of identity, and different types of disaster. So that, you know, sometimes, well, you probably know, I shouldn't lecture. As you know, some people identify not only as disaster specialists, but, you know, earthquake specialists or infectious disease specialists.
Right.
So I have, for the book, was trying to get as many different intersections as possible. So I have these different authors that I need to reach out to, but I'm anxious about, because these authors and their teams are located in India, in Brazil, in New Zealand. And I mean, there's nothing I can do, but I get little WhatsApp texts from them sometimes, and I just feel despair for them. That's not what they were going to write about. They have studies, they have obstacles. These are people, this is what they do. Like one of them writes about hydraulic dams and water issues and gender in India, for example. One of them writes about Zika and malaria and other infectious diseases in Brazil.
So it sounds like the trajectories of their research are necessarily affected by all of what's going on.
No, but their lives are. Their lives, their students' lives, their careers, their nations.
Well, that certainly puts it in context for those of us who have the luxury to, you know, work remotely as I am, for example, and to do the kind of studies that I'm working on.
It just makes me anxious. It makes me despair because I can do nothing. Other than wish them all the best and check in with them periodically. One person that I know who's a disaster specialist based in Toronto said to me months ago when we were doing these working groups, because several of us were on the working group out of the Natural Hazard Center, and I led the working group on gender and intersectionality, but I was also on the one about ethics. And Jack Rizilski, who led that one, said to me months ago, he said, we cannot ever, from this day forward, from not this day forward, but how did he put it? Because of what's going on with COVID, every communication that we have going forward, we need to worry about how the other person's feeling, how the other person is doing. And I'm sure you have encountered that before. So I'm sure you have. It's because, you're encountering me. I'm in a good mood. It's going pretty well. But yeah, you don't know. With so many things going on. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. We have had some declines in our requests for interviews based on COVID and people who are experiencing it directly within their families. So you're right on target there.
Yeah, or anxiety about their families, safety. That, we have had. But if you had tried to interview me, I think in March, I don't think I would have wanted to talk. I mean, not just about, because I just wouldn't want it to. So I think for me, though, yeah, it does matter, the timing. But I think that was part of Jack's point, too. You don't know from week to week what people are going through. And Brazil, New Zealand, no cases when we first made the agreement between us. You know, they had stopped other cases, and now they're back. The cases are back. I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway. Well, I don't have anything else to add. Good luck with your project, and I hope I will be able to see it.
Yes, would you care to see your transcript before we do anything with it?
Well, that's fine, but I don't know that I would. I think what would be nicer is if you are. I think if you have an opportunity, and I don't want to add to your burdens, but if you're going to plan to quote me directly on anything, if you can run it by me, which there's something. I don't know if I can do anything about it. I'm not going to change my work. I just mean, I might say, in that context, I'm not sure that that's the way I meant it. Or something like that, but I don't know if that would help you or just slow you down as you try and publish. So.
No, I think that would be absolutely fine, and I would want the same opportunity if it were possible. So that's absolutely no problem.
And you were explicit in the form that you will be naming us, so that's why. It's not in the aggregate.
Yes.
Yeah. But I get the offer, and I look forward to the report. I think it's a great topic. So I'm glad you're doing it. And by the way, something that we are going to try and do also is a method. It's like this thing about otter, all of these different issues. There's so many different things that we've learned that I've asked some of my former students to just take the lead on it, please. I don't have time myself, but just please write an article about so we can get that out there.
That sounds like a fantastic idea.
Good. Thank you for the encouragement. I'm going to tell them you said that. Okay.
Very good. Yeah, it's an important topic.
Yeah, and see, you already used it. So great. Okay.
Well, I hope you have
anything else. Just let me know.
Sure thing, and I hope you have a great weekend. And thanks again for your time.
Sure. My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.